My parents sold my childhood toys to buy my brother a car. Now they're begging me for help. I never expected to hear from them again. It had been years since I last spoke to my parents, years since I turned my back on the family that had so easily turned its back on me. I had built something for myself, a life without them, a life where I wasn't the forgotten child, the afterthought, the one whose sacrifices were expected but never acknowledged. I had carved out my own success, found my own place in the world, and learned to live without the gnawing ache of their indifference. And then the phone rang. At first I considered ignoring it. The number flashing on my screen was one I had deleted long ago. But some things stay burned into memory whether you want them to or not. My thumb hovered over the decline button, hesitating. They never called, not once in all these years. So why now? Against my better judgment, I picked up. There was a beat of silence before my mother's voice came through the line, hoarse, brittle, unfamiliar. "We need to talk," she said, skipping any pleasantries, any forced attempt at warmth. Of course, that was how it had always been. No small talk, no, "How have you been?" Just straight to what they wanted. "I'm listening," I said, my voice colder than I intended. A shaky breath, then the confession. "We need help." I let out a bitter laugh. Help? The word tasted foreign coming from them. They had never needed me before. Not when I was a child begging for scraps of attention. Not when I was forced to watch my brother be given everything while I got nothing. Not even when I left without looking back. But now, suddenly, they needed me? "We're in a bit of trouble." My father's voice cut in, deeper but just as desperate. "It's financial. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "We lost everything." I didn't speak, just let the weight of those words settle between us. Everything. Good. "We just need a little help getting back on our feet," my mother continued, her voice trembling, as though she already knew what my answer would be. "Just something small. Just enough to—" I didn't let her finish. "How much?" She hesitated. "How much?" I repeated, sharper this time. 100,000. I almost dropped the phone. A laugh bubbled up in my throat, one so sharp it hurt. 100,000? I repeated, making sure I had heard right. "We wouldn't be asking if we had another choice," my father said quickly, as if that somehow justified it. "We're about to lose the house. The bank—" I cut him off. "The house? You mean the house you sold my childhood for?" Silence. And there it was. The memory that had been buried under years of resentment and self-preservation. The moment everything changed for me. The day I came home to find my childhood wiped from existence. I had been 16. The age where childhood still lingers in the corners of your mind. But adulthood looms just close enough to remind you that you don't belong to either world. My room had been my sanctuary, filled with the books I had read over and over, the action figures I had collected since I was a kid, the little pieces of my life that made me me. I came home that day expecting to find everything where I had left it. Instead, I found nothing. The shelves were empty. The walls were bare. Every single thing I had cherished was gone. I ran downstairs frantic, searching for answers. My mother barely looked up from the kitchen table. My father didn't even bother to stop watching the game. "Where's my stuff?" I had demanded, my voice breaking. My mother's response was so casual, so dismissive that it took me a second to even comprehend what she was saying. "We sold it." I had stood there, frozen. "You... what?" My father sighed, finally turning toward me, annoyed. "Your brother needed a car," he said, as if that explained everything, as if it was supposed to make sense. "But—" My throat had closed up. My brother, the one who already had everything, the one who never had to ask for anything because it was always handed to him without question, got a brand new car, at the expense of my entire childhood. "You don't need those old things anyway," my mother had added. "Your brother's future is more important." And that was the moment I realized the truth. I would always come second. That was the day I stopped trying. And now, years later, here they were, begging. "I'm sorry." My mother's voice cracked through the phone, bringing me back to the present. "We didn't mean to hurt you." A bitter smile curled at my lips. "You didn't mean to hurt me," I repeated, letting the words sink in. "You sold my childhood without a second thought. You treated me like I didn't matter. And now you're calling me, expecting me to just... What? Save you?" A pause. Then my father's voice, laced with something new. Something I had never heard from him before. Defeat. "We don't have anyone else." I should have felt satisfied. I should have relished in the irony of it all. How the very son they had dismissed, disregarded, and discarded was now their only hope. But all I felt was emptiness. I took a slow breath, gripping the phone tighter. "Let me ask you something," I said, my voice steady. "If I had been the one in trouble, if I had been the one calling, begging for help, would you have helped me?" Silence. It was answer enough. I nodded, even though they couldn't see me. "Then you already know my answer." My mother sobbed on the other end. My father tried to say something, but I ended the call before he could. And just like that, it was over. I stared at my phone for a long time, waiting for the guilt to come. It never did. They had sold me out for my brother's future. Now, they could see what it felt like to be left behind. The silence after the call was louder than anything I had ever heard before. It wasn't the absence of noise that made it deafening, it was the absence of doubt. I sat there, staring at my phone, waiting for the guilt to creep in, waiting for that familiar ache in my chest, that voice in my head whispering that I had made a mistake. But it never came. Instead, there was only a strange, quiet sense of peace. It was foreign, unfamiliar, but I recognized it for what it was. Freedom. For years, I had carried the weight of being the forgotten one, the one who was only acknowledged when it was convenient. I had swallowed every slight, every moment of being overlooked, every reminder that my brother was the sun, and I was just a shadow cast by his light. And now that same family who had sold me out without hesitation was begging for my help. The irony wasn't lost on me. If I had been the one in trouble, if I had needed them the way they needed me now, they wouldn't have lifted a single finger. I had asked them that question, and their silence had told me everything I needed to know. But of course, it wasn't over. It was never that simple with them. The first call had been from my mother, her voice breaking, her words shaky with desperation. But as expected, they weren't going to stop there. Within an hour, the calls started coming in nonstop, not just from my parents, but from other relatives too. My aunt, my uncle, my cousin, the same people who never cared where I went or what I did, the same people who never checked in on me even once over the years. Suddenly, they were all deeply concerned. I let the phone ring. I let them wait. It was almost amusing, how quickly they had mobilized, how suddenly I was important when there was something at stake for them. It wasn't love. It wasn't regret. It was panic, the realization that the one person they had taken for granted was now the only one who could save them. And I had no intention of doing so. Then came the texts. "Aunt Lisa, I know you and your parents have had your differences, but this is serious. They could lose everything. Don't you think you should at least talk to them?" "Uncle Mike, this isn't just about them. Your brother still lives in that house. Do you really want to see him on the street?" Ah, there it was. My brother. I should have known this wasn't just about my parents. It was about him. It had always been about him. I clicked on his contact, staring at the name I hadn't spoken in years. Daniel, the golden child, the one who had everything handed to him while I had to fight for even the smallest scrap of acknowledgement. I hesitated for half a second, then pressed call. He answered almost immediately. "Oh, it's you." I almost laughed at how casual he sounded. No fake concern, no pretense of missing me. Just indifference. "Cut the act, Daniel," I said, my voice calm. "I'm guessing you already know why I'm calling." A pause, then a quiet sigh. Yeah. Of course he knew. Of course he expected me to come running. "Let me ask you something," I said, mirroring the exact words I had told my parents. "If I were the one in trouble, if I were the one who lost everything, would you help me?" His silence was long, uncomfortable. Then finally he said, "Probably not." I felt my lips curve into a cold smile. At least he was honest. "But that's different," he added quickly. "You don't need help. You've always been the independent one, the one who figured things out. Mom and Dad, they're not like that. They're struggling. And yeah, they messed up. But does that really mean you should just turn your back on them?" The hypocrisy was staggering. "You mean the way they turned their backs on me?" I shot back. "You mean the way they sold every single thing I ever cared about to buy you a car?" Daniel exhaled sharply, irritated. "That was years ago. Why are you still holding on to that?" I shook my head, not even surprised by his response. He would never understand, would never see things from my perspective. To him it was just stuff. To me it was proof. Proof that I had never been their priority. "I'm not holding on to it," I said, my voice steady. "I've just finally learned my place in this family." He scoffed. "So that's it? You're just going to let them lose everything?" I thought about it for a long second, then answered truthfully. "Yes." Silence. Then he muttered, "Selfish." I laughed at that. A real laugh, one full of genuine amusement. "Selfish?" I repeated. "You want to talk about selfish? Where were you when I was the one who needed help? When I was struggling? When I had nothing? Where was all this concern back then?" Nothing. Because there was no answer. Because he hadn't cared. "You're a horrible person," he finally snapped. "They're still your parents. You don't just abandon family." I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "You're right. You don't abandon family." I let that sink in before delivering the final blow. But they abandoned me first. And with that I hung up. I felt lighter. The weight I had been carrying for so long, the burden of trying, of caring too much, of hoping that one day they'd finally see me, was gone. It had taken everything in me to walk away all those years ago, and I had spent too much time wondering if I had done the right thing. But now I knew. This time, there was no hesitation, no guilt, no second guessing. I wasn't their backup plan anymore, and I never would be again. Silence can be deafening when you expect an explosion. After I sent that message and blocked them all, I braced myself for the inevitable. I expected more calls from unknown numbers, emails filled with guilt-tripping, family members showing up unannounced to my door, demanding that I be reasonable. I prepared for Daniel's rage, for my parents' predictable act of hurt and disappointment, for my relatives to take turns attempting to convince me that I was the problem. But what I got instead was nothing. Days passed, then weeks, and my phone stayed silent. I waited for some last-ditch attempt to drag me back in, a desperate voicemail, a letter in the mail, some grand manipulation designed to make me feel guilty enough to fold. But nothing came. And that, more than anything, confirmed what I had always suspected. I had never been important enough to fight for. Not really. Not beyond what I could give them, beyond the role I played in their lives as the backup plan, the afterthought, the disposable one. Once I made it clear that I was no longer willing to be their emergency safety net, they simply moved on, like I had never mattered at all. That realization didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It didn't break me. If anything, it felt like finally exhaling after years of suffocation. Because now, I knew for certain that walking away had been the right choice. Still, something inside me felt unfinished, like I needed a final act, something to ensure I would never be dragged back into their orbit again. So I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I went home, not to my parents' house. They had long since lost the right to call any place home for me, but to the small town where I had grown up. I drove past the streets that once felt suffocating, the neighborhoods filled with childhood memories that had never really belonged to me. Everything looked the same, yet emptier, as if the illusion of nostalgia had been permanently stripped away. Then I went to the only place that mattered, the old thrift store at the corner of Main and Ridgeview. It had been years since I had last stepped inside, but the moment I did, I was hit with the familiar scent of aged books, dust, and faint traces of vanilla from the candles they always kept near the register. My heart pounded as I walked past the shelves, the bins of old toys, the glass cases filled with childhood relics people had discarded. And then I saw it, sitting behind the glass, almost like it had been waiting for me. A small, worn-out action figure, not just any action figure. Mine. I would have recognized it anywhere. The faded colors, the tiny scratch on the helmet, the way one of the arms was just slightly looser than the other. It had been my favorite toy growing up, the one I had carried everywhere, the one I had held on to when everything else felt uncertain. And yet, here it was, in a store full of forgotten things, just like I had been. I didn't cry. I didn't feel sadness. If anything, I felt a strange sense of peace. I bought it without hesitation, not because I needed it, not because I wanted to cling to the past, but because it was a reminder, a symbol that I had once meant something, even if only to myself. And that was enough. I left town that day without ever seeing my family again. No goodbyes, no dramatic confrontations, no final words exchanged. Because some people don't deserve closure. Some people only deserve to be left behind, and I wasn't going to waste another second waiting for people who had already proven over and over again that they would never choose me. Time moves differently when you're no longer weighed down by the past. In the years that followed, I built a life that was mine, a life that wasn't dictated by guilt or obligation, by the fear of disappointing people who never truly cared about me. I found people who saw me, not as an afterthought, but as someone worth loving, worth choosing. And my family? They faded into irrelevance. Occasionally I would hear things through old acquaintances. My parents' financial struggles had gotten worse. Daniel had lost the car they bought him after racking up debt. The people who had once expected me to be their safety net had finally collapsed under their own choices. And the strangest part? I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, no desire to see them suffer, because their lives no longer had anything to do with me.